Hello and welcome back to MK Audiobook Club, where this time we are discussing the epic adventures of Lydia Bennet. I'll let you guys take it away.
So why would you bother making an adaptation of a work of classic literature that's already been adapted perfectly? You can make an adaptation that's faithful and true in its own way, that's different and wonderful and worthwhile. So when they made the Lydia Bennet Diaries, it had this unexpectedly complex and interestingly realized character who'd always been treated as a secondary character. And in the Lydia Bennet Diaries, the character of Lydia, there was a depth there. There was more to the character, and it made it really compelling.
Here are my thoughts on the epic adventures of Lydia Bennet. The audiobook.
I listened to the audiobook of The Epic Adventures of Lydia Bennet, and it was my very first audiobook experience, The Epic Adventures of Lydia Bennet.
So this is my first actual audiobook experience.
I watched LBD, and this doesn't happen with me a lot, but as I was watching, I was like, I love this girl who's playing Lydia. I am now proudly a part of MK Audiobook Club. We are discussing this book, The Epic Adventures of Lydia Bennet, which I've been waiting so long to come out. It finally has.
What the audiobook did was give us Lydia's voice. And that is something that I've been waiting a very long time for.
I was really excited when I found out that they were going to be making a book for Lydia, because I felt that at the end of LBD, her story is very up in the air, and so I was really just excited, one, to get another chance to go back into the world of the Lydia Bennet Diaries, and that Lydia gets her own story.
It's Lydia. It's her voice. She's saying things.
Three things that I really loved about the book and Mary-Kate's narration. Well, the first thing was just getting Lydia's voice. In the space that the novel had, you were able to really go into detail about Lydia's thoughts, and in Mary-Kate's reading of them, of those thoughts, there was just a depth that you saw at times in LBD, but it was very much there in her reading, where she could be serious and reflective, and you really saw more of the character behind the silly party girl. And she was there too, but having it in Mary-Kate's voice, I think, made it believable and compelling in a way that if some other voice actor had done it, it wouldn't have been the same.
What's interesting is that I didn't get quite as depressed or feel quite as dark about her story while audiobooking. I think because Lydia's voice is so distinct, and even when she's at her worst moments, I could still hear the strength behind her character.
You could feel how invested she was in this story. Like, she wasn't just the narrator of the story, she was a part of the story.
I guess that's the thing that the book did that videos could never have done, is really give us that internal thought process. And to get to hear that, and the way that Mary-Kate's voice was like tired or sad or angry or exhausted was just, it really brought me into that story.
Your pacing and delivery was perfect, and in some chapters I thought you gave some really moving performances when you were portraying arguments between the characters, like between Lydia and Jane. I thought that was really well done too.
I just thought that you brought so much to the audiobook, and I think that listening to it, it brings a lot more to it than just reading through it for the first time, because you get the emotion that you, Mary-Kate, bring to it as Lydia.
I think it's particularly resonant coming from the vlog series format of the LBD to hear you reading this story. I think this format, more than television or movies, allows us as viewers to feel a connection with these characters. I mean, they're talking directly to us. It wouldn't have felt right to hear somebody else reading this story. I have to agree.
The second thing that I loved were the voices that Mary-Kate did, not just of Lydia, but her voice for Mary and all the other characters.
Some of her voices, like her character voices, were spot on perfect. Like when she first did her mom's voice, I was like, whoa, this sounds exactly like when Ashley Clements did it.
Mr. Collins and Mrs. Bennet, I thought you did spot on.
And then when she did Lizzie's voice, there were points where it sounded almost exactly like Ashley, and I was like, this is freaky.
I really liked your take on Lizzie's and Mary's voices.
When you did Ashley's voice or Jane or Mr. Collins, I totally pictured them.
Lizzie was so Lizzie. Even though she was only in like 3 scenes, she was so Lizzie.
And especially her voice for Lizzie. It was amazing. You know, just her vocal mannerisms that Mary-Kate was able to get just sounded like Ashley doing Lizzie.
I'm not quite sure why, but I particularly loved your Mary voice.
Mary was one of my favourites.
But Mary's voice I thought sounded kind of like Cody's voice. And Harriet, I thought she sounded like Sinead Prasad's Lenore from A Telltale Vlog.
But I also loved your Jane voice and your Bing voice. That was really fun to listen to and to have those characters come back. To me, your Jane voice felt a little more like Lizzie's costume theater impressions of Jane than Jane herself, but it worked.
I mean, some of the guys kind of blended together, but I think guys are kind of hard to do, so I'm gonna give her a pass on that one. But all the girl voices were really good. And so was Mary's. I liked Mary's voice too.
I really loved the book, and I loved where they took Lydia's character. They didn't try to pretend that she was fine after the events of LBD. Her recovery was still in progress, and I appreciate the fact they didn't try to sweep it under the rug. But by the last few pages, I felt like Lydia would land on her feet no matter what life threw at her. It felt like the first half of it, where she was finishing up her degree and she was backsliding into destructive behavior, seemed very believable to me. She was dealing with a lot, and I don't think any of us thought she would be okay immediately after dealing with everything. That would have been a little bit unrealistic.
Lydia and Mary had like a longer and deeper arc in this book, obviously, which I really liked.
I really disliked Cody. I was really glad we weren't supposed to like him, because the second he came on the scene, I was very wary of him. I was very glad when it turned out that my gut instinct was right, and I feel like that also means you did a very good job on the audio for that portion, because I could tell right away he wasn't somebody I really wanted to get invested in, but I wasn't so certain that I didn't have my doubts.
And Cody was a dumb butt. I literally punched the air during their big fight.
Guess what? My life is not your story, jackass.
Yeah!
I loved the fact that we got to read some of Lydia's schoolwork in the book. It made me laugh, smile, and fall in love with her more, because that is exactly how Lydia would write papers.
The Dracula essay was such a neat and like clever way, I guess, of tying up that chapter of her life.
I also loved Mary and Violet together. Violet was such a fun character.
Violet dates girls. Called it.
I really liked Mary's storyline and was very glad to see a non-heterosexual couple emerge from the storyline in a very real way. The relationship between Mary and Violet didn't feel forced at all, or overly like, look, we put in a gay couple.
All of her interactions with Lizzie and with Jane and with Mary, they were all kind of perfect and all kind of what I needed from them.
I was so happy to see Jane and Bing and that they were doing well, and I really enjoyed the section where Lydia goes to Bing's work. I think that was one of the most moving sections for me and helped to put Lydia's situation into perspective for Lydia, and also maybe for readers or listeners.
I loved that we got to see Jane angry and a little bit petty. You know, I guess the kind of nastier side to her constant niceness. I liked that, and it felt very real and true to what we did see of Jane in the videos.
My favorite section of the book was Lydia's adventure to New York. I was a bit frustrated during the beginning section of the book because I just wanted Lydia to be able to talk openly with someone about what she was really feeling. But the New York section was so refreshing, and when I really got hooked on the story.
I loved how familiar New York felt in this book, but just that it felt like the perfect backdrop for that moment in the story. It felt like the perfect backdrop for Lydia to kind of figure this stuff out.
My favorite part was when Lydia went to New York to visit Jane, just because she got to meet so many new people and figure out that she really did have a place in the world.
I love that she gets new friends in New York whom she probably didn't think she'd fit in with back home, and it shows how much she's grown, but she still retains that Lydia sparkle we've come to know and love.
Milo and Kat were amazing, even though Milo's a little bit suspicious. And when they saved her from dinner with Casey, I was like, is Lydia getting seduced by a couple? But the party was a good alternative as well.
Going into this novel, I was like, Lydia, you just got off like this really bad ride with George, and I want to see you become an independent woman. Like, you don't need a man in your life. And then Cody came, and I was like, no, get away, shoo, no guys allowed. Cody turned out to be horrible, so he left, which was nice. I was happy about that. And then we met Milo, and I was, I'll admit, he grew on me. I was okay with him, but I still wanted to see Lydia be completely independent.
He grew on me. I don't think Lydia needed a love interest, but he was a decent enough one. In some ways, it was good to get to see her, forming something romantically tinged and moving on from George in that specific way.
And I love her New York friends, and I'm very excited about Milo. I was very happy that it didn't end with them definitively getting together, though, because I didn't really want that to be Lydia's story, where she ends up in a happily ever after. I think it was a good decision to keep her single, with the hope of somebody on the horizon, but more importantly with the hope of this college that she really wants to go to, and making her dreams come true, and figuring out what she wants to do with her life was a much more important story to tell.
I'm very glad that we got to see a more real and vulnerable Mrs. Bennet.
I'm glad that it's nothing. Yay for communicating about it. Well done, Mama B. And well done, Lydia. And well done, Kitty.
George happened, and I could kind of really picture it, especially as I was listening to it, and it's just so great that Lydia got to have that moment and that George was left kind of being like, oh, okay.
The scene between Lydia and George. Tearjerker, tearjerker. That was one of the tearjerkers.
Confrontation with George was pretty heavy.
I know you said that that was meant to be an additional scene that was going to be shot for Lydia's channel and didn't end up happening, and I think I would have really enjoyed it on Lydia's channel, but in the book, I don't know. It had to be at the end because it had to be, but also at the end I felt like she'd experienced so much growth without having to have that confrontation with Wickham. I don't know, it was very complicated for me because I was glad to see she had it, but on the other hand, she'd come so far without Wickham. And part of it was that so often in life we want to confront those people that hurt us and we don't get the chance to, so there was that kind of fantasy fulfillment aspect that I enjoyed, but also I kind of wanted to see Lydia be in my shoes, and I'm sure other people's shoes, if not getting that opportunity to go, hey, why did you do this? What were you thinking? But all that aside, it still made me very emotional and weepy, and I think I was ultimately glad it was there.
I was a little irritated that Lydia did not punch George in the face, but I understand why she didn't, and also I'm proud of her for not.
I do wish that we, the readers, had known which necklace Lydia was wearing. I do wish we would get to know that.
Watching her go through this journey to realize what she needs and wants is both exhausting and exhilarating. It says a lot that at the end of the book I felt proud of her. She was more than just a character to me. I was living this with her, and to see her change throughout the book was so personal.
There's one more quote from the book that I wanted to mention that I really liked. Eventually, if you talk long enough, something true is bound to spill out. You know, the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, counting all the spin-offs, ended up with 9.5 hours of video, which is a long time. I think some truth did spill out in that 9.5 hours. I think the most worthwhile thing for me about the show ended up being the relationships that had time to develop between the four main characters, the four actors they started with. And similarly, the audiobook for The Epic Adventures of Lydia Bennet ended up at 9.25 hours, and there was enough space there for some truth to spill out. Kate Rorick and Rachel Kiley's writing and Mary Kate's voice acting got some important truths across, and it was really worthwhile.
The end gave me the warm feeling all my favorite books do. Though the story may be over for us, Lydia has a long, exciting life ahead of her, and I'm so glad I get to see a part of it.
Lydia needed her own story, and this was the perfect story for her. She's come so far, and I'm so proud of her, and I'm so glad I've got to go on this journey with her.
It provided a very satisfying ending to Lydia's story, mostly to know that Lydia could get to a place where she was okay. I thought the book was very well written and felt very much like it was coming from Lydia's voice. Great job to Rachel and Kate.
It's a phenomenal audiobook, and I think that the book is a wonderful story, and I was so pleased with the way that it went.
Props to Rachel Kiley and Kate Rorick, who wrote the books. I love the story, and I thought it was a beautiful ending for Lydia. She gets to have her own voice after all that's happened to her.
I loved it so much. It actually moved me way more than I thought it would, and I really connected to it as a university student who's gone through, similar experiences that Lydia has, and it was really cool to see a book made about that in a modern context, and I really liked it.
It was great that we finally got that story centered on Lydia. That was very much the story that Lydia of LBD deserved.
Good job, everyone. I'm very grateful that this book exists, and I am very grateful that Lydia's story got this addition to it.
Yeah, but obviously I still did Chris kind of low, and I kind of feel like Chris sounds like Jane's Darcy. I kept hearing that in my brain when I was doing